Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us to observe the 2 minutes silence this morning. I think it's 2 minutes past 11 now by my clock, so we'll get started. And a very warm welcome to everyone joining us online today. I need to just say at the start that we're recording the session this morning, so welcome to those of you who might be watching back on our website later as well. We'll start with some introductions. I'm Joe Cuddeford. I'm Director of Smart Data Research UK, which is UKRI's main investment in new and emerging forms of data. And this is the first in a new series of events that's exploring how new forms of smart data can help to address major societal challenges. Now, before I introduce our panel, I'm just going to take a couple of minutes just to say a brief word about Smart Data Research UK. So SDR UK is a £59 million investment in data infrastructure, and we're aiming to unlock the power of smart data generated through our everyday digital lives. And we want to put that data in the hands of researchers that are working for the public good. So we have recently established a network of 6 national data services that are all working to make it easier for researchers to use smart data safely for research. And you'll be able to find out loads more about those services if you go to our website. We'll put a link in the chat, and you can explore the 6 data services and the kinds of data that they're making available. So today we're focusing on the economy in particular, which is a big priority for the UK. It's also a big priority for UK research and innovation, which has a new mission to advance knowledge, improve lives, and drive growth. And that probably goes without saying with the audience that we have here today, but UK productivity continues to be a significant challenge. We've had several economic shocks over the past 15 years. Markets continue to be disrupted by technological change, environmental change, global fragmentation, changing consumer behavior. And at the same time, our ability to measure and monitor the things that matter in the modern economy is under particular strain. And we were just talking before the webinar started about this morning's unemployment data that many of you may have seen already. We've seen a big rise in the unemployment rate this morning, but you only need to get 4 or 5 paragraphs through the story before you read the skepticism about the quality of the data because of the sharp fall that we've seen in response rates to the labour force survey in this case. And yet, the good news is that every day, millions of our financial transactions, job adverts, the purchases that we make are leaving behind digital traces and creating a vast amount of data that could help us to see the economy in real time in a much richer level of geographic and sectoral detail. Our panelists today are working at the front line of that opportunity, and each of them are leading very exciting work using new sources of data to try to understand the economy in new ways. And so I'm delighted to be joined by Michael Hardy, Deputy Director at the Office for National Statistics, Rachel Griffiths, Co-Director of the Centre for the Microeconomic Analysis of Public Policy at the IFS, Dougie Robb, who is the Chief Executive of the Smart Data Foundry, which is one of our partners and leads one of the Smart Data Research data services on financial data, and Philip Bunn, Senior Technical Advisor at the Bank of England. And the format for this morning's session is we're just going to start off by hearing from each of our panelists in turn, just to say a bit about how smart data is being used in your organizations, what you're doing with it and how you're finding it, before we then move into a bit of a discussion, and we'll hopefully have some time during that discussion to take some audience questions too. So please do use the Q&A function to ask your questions, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can in the second half. I think that's everything. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker then, which is Michael Hardy, Deputy Director at ONS. So Michael, over to you.
Introduction, Joe. So as Joe said, my name is Michael Hardy, Deputy Director of Prices Division at ONS. So my role is to lead the Prices project, and the aim of that project is to use large administrative data to improve the quality and granularity of our consumer price statistics. And we're also reducing our reliance on legacy infrastructure as part of the project as well. So just a brief introduction. So what are consumer price statistics? So they measure how the price of a basket of goods and services change over time. There's around 750 items in the basket. It's quite diverse. So think of it as tracking the change in price of everyday items such as bread, milk, haircuts, clothes, gas, electricity, golf queen fees. There's a wide range of items in the basket. So we have three main measures that we produce. So we have the Consumer Prices Index. So many of you will be familiar with that particular statistic. It's used by the Bank of England to target inflation. We also have the CPIH, which is the CPI plus a measure of owner-occupiers housing costs. We view that as our most comprehensive measure of inflation. We also have the household cost indices, which are designed to measure the changing costs and prices faced by different household groups. And the aim of this project is to transform all of those measures of inflation. So we've been building up our transformation over time. The reason that we've done that is to manage the risk around using these new data sources, particularly in terms of consumer price statistics. They're used to upgrade index-linked gilts, pensions, taxes, benefits. So our risk appetite here as an organisation is pretty much close to zero. So we need to move carefully in terms of onboarding these new data sources. So firstly, I'll introduce the data sources. So we've managed to acquire a wide range of data sources over the last few years. So we started with rail fares data from Rail Delivery Group. Previously, we used one data point, which was just the average uplift in rail prices each year as part of the regulatory uplift that occurs. And we've moved to using 40 million data points a month. We've also managed to acquire administrative data for rents as well, around 500,000 data points, and second-hand cars. We've moved from using a sample of 135 cars to 300,000 from Auto Trader. And the biggest change is just on the horizon. So we're aiming to incorporate grocery scanner data, so data collected at the point of sale in supermarkets in March next year. So we're doing that for around 50% of the groceries market. So instead of sending price collectors into stores across the UK to collect price information, we'll utilise direct data feeds from supermarkets, and we'll be using approximately 300 million prices derived from the sale of over 1 billion products every month. So a step change in the amount of data that we will be using. It's been a long journey to acquire these new data sources. So we've been working with the retailers for some time, and understandably, they've needed reassurances around how we kind of store and publish their data. So that's been an interesting journey, which I'm happy to go into in a bit more detail in the questions after. In order to exploit these new data sources, we've had to develop a wide range of new methods. We've had to redesign the end-to-end statistical value chain to deal with characteristics of the data, such as product churn and controlling for quality and quantity changes, which is an important aspect of compiling price statistics. So there's a wide range of methods papers published on our website to be transparent about the methods that we're using to exploit these new data sources. And we've also had to change our systems as well. So the legacy infrastructure that we had in place at ONS was developed in the 90s and simply not capable of processing the huge volumes of data that we're now receiving as an organization. So why is all this important? What additional insights do these large administrative data sets give us? So if I start with rent statistics, now that we have the microdata available to us, previously we published data on 12 UK regions. We now publish data on 300 local authorities. And for each of those local authorities, we provide price levels, growth rates, And we have a number of interactive maps on our website where you can compare your local authority to the UK average, you know, so you can get really granular information on what's happening to rental prices in your area. For scanner data, instead of sending price collectors into store to collect prices on a particular day, we have prices across the entire month. We also have a census of prices as well. So we've moved away from using a sample for those retailers. And importantly, we have the underlying quantities as well. So we can not only see how much of a particular, the price at which a particular product is being bought at, we can see how much of that product is being bought as well. And that's particularly important when you have a shock to the economy. So cost of living crisis or, you know, disruption to global supply chains as a consequence of the war in Ukraine. You know, the data sources that we have now better capture kind of those shocks to the economy. For second-hand cars and rail fares, you know, second-hand cars we can now break down by fuel type, which we couldn't do previously, petrol, diesel, and we're soon to include hybrid and electric cars. And for rail fares, we can break down, you know, the statistics by ticket type, for example, and region as well. So they're just a few examples of how having access to those large administrative data sets allow us to produce much more granular data. We have seen that the impact on inflation at a headline level is quite small. So we tend to find that the impact of these new data sources is between 0.1 and 0.2 percentage points. So it doesn't change the overall inflation picture that much. But what it does do is allow us to gain deeper insights into what's driving inflation. And that information is feeding into monetary and fiscal policy decisions across the UK. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Michael. That was a really good sense of the long journey involved in accessing many of these data sets. And I think we can get more into that later. But next, I'll pass on to Rachel Griffiths. Rachel, over to you.
Great, thanks a lot. I'm talking on behalf of the Institute for Fiscal Studies. So IFS is an independent economics research institute. One of the large funders is the ESRC. And what we aim to do is to help policymakers and wider society understand the impact of a range of different policies on individuals, households, and businesses. So IFS has been at the forefront of the creation and use of microdata since it was initially funded many decades ago. And in recent years, there's been a lot of new sources and types of data that have become available that have enabled completely new areas of research and also help supplement traditional data sources to help us do what we've always done better. So I'm just going to give a kind of high-level description of a few examples of places, of areas of research where these new types of data have been particularly influential and helpful in the work we've done. So one example is thinking about the impact of the recent surge in energy prices that led to concerns about the impact, particularly on low-income households and their ability to afford energy and the impacts it had on the rest of their spending budget. So large-scale and really quite expensive policies were introduced to address this concern. And it's an interesting question to try and understand how well targeted those were. Did they protect the people we wanted to protect? And could they have been better designed, so achieve the same outcomes at lower cost, for example, or been more targeted at the people we cared about? So IFS researchers use detailed information on spending and income that came from individual level bank account and credit card statements to look at how energy spending responded, first of all, to the price change and the impact that had on other types of spending. So did people have to, the heat or eat debate, did people have to spend money on heating? So, for example, cut back in other areas of necessities, and how that varied across different households. And they could also use this data to model alternative policies to the ones the government implemented. And what they did is showed that there were feasible policy options that could have achieved similar outcomes at considerably lower costs, like 4.5 million less. So the data we used for that were from a company called Exact One, which is it's data that they collect data that's designed for institutional investors and companies who want to analyze consumer spending in kind of more or less real time. and the underlying data from ClearScore, which is like a fintech company that provides apps to individuals who want to monitor and manage their finances and understand their credit scores. So that data is being collected for those reasons, but then has been made available to researchers for analysis. So that same type of data, that kind of real time, that's very disaggregate in the time dimension and also very granular in the spending dimension, has also been used to address a number of other questions to do with benefit design. So when there were changes in the timing of payments of universal credit, for example, the high frequency measurement can really help us understand whether those changes impact importantly on people that we're trying to protect with those policies. So a completely different area of research is where we've used household, so where we've tried to look at household spending patterns. So we know that household expenditure surveys, the traditional ones that have been collected by the ONS, have run into problems because of declining response rates. And the kind of naturally occurring spending data that we just heard Michael talk about can help us to understand spending patterns at a much more granular level and with much more high frequency, so we can really model better individuals and firms' responses to economic shocks. So these data allow us to model consumer spending and how they, as I said, how that spending, how responses to that spending varies across different types of households, households with children, pensioners, households of different income levels, which we may care about particularly in some different policies. Most importantly, really, in some ways, is that that data allows us to look at how firms respond. So we can look not only at how individual consumers respond, but how firms maybe change the product offering in response to a tax or some other policy intervention, how they change other market behaviors. And so to understand not only like the direct consequences of policies, but the indirect effects which can kind of offset or boost the effectiveness of a policy. So we've used these types of consumer panel data, consumer scanner data collected at the individual household level to analyze a whole bunch of taxes like alcohol taxes, taxes on sugary drinks, restrictions to advertising to consumers, regulations of baby formula, changes to the choice environment within stores, etc. And they've also been used kind of complementary to some of the work done by the ONS to look at to measure inflation at a more granular level, to look, for example, at what the impact of the recent inflation price surges has been across the income distribution. For example, showing that actually recent inflation was higher amongst lower quality products, which are more likely to be consumed by low income households, leading to what's been termed like cheapflation. So I'm just, in the interest of time, just going to highlight two other very high level things. So one is the granularity of the data that you get from the finance, the credit card and expenditure data can be very useful at the regional level as well. We don't have great regional statistics on expenditure, for example, in the UK. And so to understand like regional variation and inequalities, that data can be very useful. And finally, the other data we've made a lot of use from is vacancy data, job vacancy postings online, which can help us understand the impact of shocks like Brexit or the trade shocks and the impact they're having in real time on the labor market, and thinking about the kind of policy interventions in terms of skills development, etc. So I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Rachel. That's really great stuff. And you mentioned a few of those financial data sources, which I think is a great segue towards Dougie and what they're doing in the financial data service. So over to you, Dougie.
Thank you very much, Joe. Good morning, and thanks for inviting me along to talk today. It's great to be with you. So I'm Dougie Robb, CEO of Smart Data Foundry and also co-director of Fines. Fines is, as Joe mentioned, the SDR UK supported financial data service, and it's run by both Smart Data Foundry and the University of Edinburgh. So at Finds, we partner with financial services. Financial services donate their customer data to us so that we can then on-share it. And I'll talk briefly about the data that we have and how this is being used to create some new insights. So amongst others, we receive data from NatWest Bank and Sage, Sage being the accounting software provider. So from NatWest, we receive a weekly drop of aggregate and effectively anonymized transaction data from 5 million UK current accounts. And this data is shared across more than 30 income and expenditure categories. And from Sage, we receive a quarterly drop of transaction data from a sample of 130,000 UK SMEs. Now, in brief, the value of the data that we receive is really across sort of 4 areas. One is timely. It's also highly localized, and it's temporal. And then lastly, it is complementary and works well with traditional and existing data sources. And I'll talk a bit more about that as we go through. Now, for both NatWest and Sage, we will curate the data to varying degrees from minimally curated through to highly curated. Minimally curated, we would also refer to that as microdata, and that's available through our trusted research environment. But at the more highly curated end of the spectrum, the data is available in several ways, including via map-based visual dashboards. So I'm going to talk initially about the aggregate data, how we share it, how it's used, and then I'll work towards talking about applications of our microdata. So at the highest level, one way in which we share aggregate data is through our monthly economic nowcast, and we share indicators at a UK level, but also at England, Scotland, and Wales levels. And these insights are across 3 aggregate metrics, and we started to share these in March this year. So utilising NatWest, the data we get from NatWest, we calculate something we call living beyond means. We define this as the percentage of people who are spending 120% or more of their income. We calculate this on a 13-week rolling average basis. It was last updated on 3rd of November, so it's very current. And it was showing that 13% of people in the UK were living beyond their means. And this was up 1.4% over the previous month. Again, utilising NatWest data, we calculate average weekly income after tax. It's after tax because it's what you see in the bank accounts. So this includes salary, pensions, and benefits. And again, it's calculated on that 13-week rolling average basis. Last updated on the 3rd of November as well. And the figure for that period was £317, and that was down over 3% from the previous month. Now, turning to Sage, utilising their small business accounting data, we calculate a simple productivity metric. This is real revenue per employee. It's calculated quarterly. It was last updated just at the end of August, and it was just over £11,000 per employee, and that was up 4% on the previous quarter. Now, having started our nowcast in March this year, I think we're all looking forward to the point where we have at least a year's data, and then 2 years, and then so on, creating that long-term picture and allowing us to see, seasonal trends and insights. Now, that's quite high level, but if interested in a deeper, more localized insights, we have a data product called our Economic Wellbeing Explorer. This is our map-based insights tool. Allows users to explore trends and themes at national, regional, and then local level. And the idea is that it's available to support. So it's a valuable source of research evidence. It can support resource planning, service design, policy interventions, and for public sector. The Wellbeing Explorer, it provides a selection of different financial well-being indicators. For example, the extent to which people might be relying on their overdraft or living beyond their means. And these indicators are presented visually by circles on a map, and where the circle size indicates the extent of, say, overdraft usage within that location, and these are updated monthly. These financial indicators are then visualized alongside contextual data indicators, such as demographic, housing, education, or IMD, where the extent of these other contextual indicators is indicated by circle color, i.e. the darker the circle, darker the color, the greater the extent. And so we might, for example, we might look at some of these aggregate financial indicators alongside things like school attainment, EPC ratings, council tax arrears, or indeed some IMD metrics. And these indicators and combinations of indicators can be explored from a national and UK-wide view, Scotland view, England view, and Wales view, all the way down to a regional and then a more localized view. And by local, what we mean is neighbourhood or MSOA level. Our Wellbeing Explorer has already been used by multiple local authorities to support and monitor interventions and create intervention ideas. And that's off the back of a successful pilot we've been running with East Renfrewshire Council up here in Scotland. Now, thinking about applications of the micro data that we have, I'll just talk to a few practical examples. Labour market being a theme from this morning already, we believe that by working with the categorised data that we get from NatWest, we'll be able to see what's happening as people move in and out of employment, for example, by looking at changes to salary and benefits income, and how that income fluctuates overall, and then and looking at this at that localised level. Utilising the data that we get from Sage, we are providing data for a research project looking at the success of relative regional SME funding across the UK. And this work is also going to make use of some NatWest-based aggregate metrics. Working a bit closer to home with the University of Edinburgh, again, looking at taking NatWest data and also this time publicly available data, we've created a data product that is capable of adding to the just transition debate. This combines current account data and also publicly available data such as EPC ratings for housing, so we can start investigating things like net zero affordability to inform some of those local interventions. And again, working with University of Edinburgh academics, we are providing data for some research work that's looking at the impact of large-scale economic shocks on consumer finances. And I think we would also be keen to expand that work to look at things like the impact of base rate rises on, essential, non-essential expenditure by age, by location. And lastly, we're also sharing some income and expenditure consumer banking data to support research into local consumption and spending and living standards. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the data that we have and how we use it. And hopefully that gives a small flavour of how our data can be used to create some fresh insights.
Thank you so much, Dougie. There's a lot to digest there. And I think we can get into some of those points around linking financial data to other kinds of data like energy data later on too. But before we do, I'm going to hand over to Philip Bunn from the Bank of England. And as we know, the bank has some quite important decisions that it makes, and data is really important in that. So Philip, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Morning, everyone. So yeah, I'm Phil Bunn, and I work as an economist in the monetary policy area at the Bank of England. And my role is to manage a team at the bank who run a business survey called the Decision Maker Panel, or DMP survey, as I might refer to it. I think this is quite an innovative survey that's helped improve our understanding of the economy and growth along a number of different dimensions. And that's what I'm going to talk mostly about here. So the DMP survey is a monthly online survey of just over 2,000 businesses. This was run by the Bank of England together with King's College London and the University of Nottingham. And it also receives funding from UKRI through the ESRC too. And the main aim of this is to help the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee understand what's happening in the economy sort of directly from businesses, and also to find out what they expect to happen over the next year as well. So the survey covers things like sales, prices, wages, employment, investment, as well as special questions on sort of topical policy issues. And quite a lot of the work that we've done on this survey is more related to inflation, which you kind of expect given the sort of inflation target of the MPC. But I was going to talk a bit more about some of the growth related topics here, given that was sort of more of the focus of this session. I mean, in general, what we've been trying to do with this survey is use it to collect types of information that are not readily available from elsewhere, to sort of fill sort of existing data gaps in the sort of the information available from businesses. And I think that the DMP survey has got sort of maybe three main strengths relative to other business surveys. So first, most of the questions ask businesses quite precise numerical questions, rather than maybe asking them just whether they're expecting things to get sort of better or worse over the next year, which is what a lot of other business surveys would typically tend to do. I think that's particularly helpful when economic shocks are large, for maybe like, for example, during the COVID pandemic. It can help sort of understand the magnitudes of different shocks, not just the directions. And having that, I think that more quantitative data also makes it much more useful for research. And I think that's one of the reasons why the DMP survey has, I think, been a useful dual purpose survey that's helped both with sort of informing policy work, but also with research too. Having that numerical data is sort of makes it easier to evaluate the survey data against other data sources, which I think is important for assessing the reliability of all different types of new data sources. To be able to compare to other sort of other information and help you to decide how informative this data is and how much weight to put on it. But for example, we can do things like compare what a firm says about the number of employees that they report in the DMP survey against what the firm will eventually publish in their accounts sort of a year or so afterwards. If you're asking for exact numbers, and it also makes the sort of the aggregated data from the DMP survey more easy to compare to sort of official statistics too. I think a second feature of the DMP survey is it asks firms about the distribution of their expectations, not just about the sort of single most likely outcome, which not many other surveys do that. I think that this has helped to create measures of uncertainty around the expectations that businesses have, and I think it's important for policymakers to know how confident businesses feel about what will happen in the future and how much weight to place on the predictions that firms are making at different points in time. And uncertainty also affects the decisions that businesses make today as well, in particular how much they invest and how many people they employ. So when businesses are more uncertain about the future, they're less likely to make big investments soon that will be costly to reverse in the future. And so I think it's important to try and measure and monitor uncertainty. And I think we've developed some useful measures of uncertainty using our DMP survey. I mean, a third key feature of the DMP data, I think, is that they're very timely. So that's kind of important, both in terms of getting the results to policymakers quickly, because data are much more valuable, I think, for policy if they can help understand what's happening in the economy now rather than what happened 2 or 3 years ago. But I also think that the ability to ask questions on new economic shocks quickly after they take place is also important, to be able to sort of address the types of questions that policymakers want to know the answers to. I know particularly when sort of new shocks emerge and there's not much information about that, getting kind of early read from businesses on sort of how they might expect a response, I think is one particularly valuable way that this survey has been used. And we first started this survey back in 2016 to try and help understand the effects of Brexit on the economy, and that was partly because we didn't think that there were many other good sources of data out there to help monitor the effects of Brexit in a sort of a timely way. And obviously, Brexit has been an important influence on UK economic growth over the sort of past decade or so. I think with the DMP survey, it's helped us to track the uncertainty that was created by Brexit and the types of firms it particularly affected, where we showed how Brexit-related uncertainty was very persistent and was a kind of significant drag on investment. And it was related to things like uncertainty about the process and the timing for the UK leaving the EU, as well as uncertainty about just what sort of longer term trading arrangements might be. We're also able to use this survey to sort of directly ask firms about their exposure to the EU along various different dimensions. So not just trade, but things like exposure to the use of migrant labour, or exposure to sort of EU regulations and things like that, or ownership. And that allowed us to monitor differences in things like employment, investment, productivity between firms that were kind of relatively more and less exposed, as a way of sort of helping to understand the impact on the economy overall. But as well as Brexit and COVID, and also the measures of sort of more general uncertainty that I've talked about, there are a number of other sort of topic areas that the survey has covered. I mean, there have been a kind of quite a large number of sort of economic shocks that have sort of taken place in the economy over the last 10 years or so. I mean, as well as the sort of the Brexit, COVID, the big rise in inflation as well. And in relation to growth, we've included questions that have tried to help understand the effects of increases in interest rates between 2021 and 2023 on things like firms' investment and employment. The role of financial constraints as a factor sort of holding back investments, including sort of impacts on constraints on both firms' internal and external finance. And then more recently, trying to use the survey to help understand the impact of the increases in employer national insurance contributions that took effect in April this year, and also been asking firms about how they see the sort of potential for AI to boost growth in their business in the future. So quite a few sort of different examples of how I think kind of new data that's generated by this survey and the sort of survey-based approach has helped us to understand economic growth. And it's also worth adding that we publish aggregated data from the DMP survey on the bank's website each month, and that the microdata are also available for research via the ONS's secure research service. So I think this sort of overview of the DMP survey is one example of how the Bank of England has used kind of relatively new and innovative data source to help improve its understanding of the economy. This is the one that sort of relates most closely to my own work, but I think there are plenty of other examples too, and definitely interested in having sort of more and exciting new data sources in the future too. I mean, there are also kind of a number of challenges with using these different sources of data, and maybe that's something we might get onto more in the next part of the discussion, but I think for now I'll leave it there.
Philip, so that's the conclusion of the kind of first part of the webinar, and we're going to get into the panel discussion now. So I just want to remind attendees that you can use the question function, so please do put any questions that you can burning questions into the chat. I wanted to just mention before we go to the sort of first discussion question, just a point on terminology, because I realised that we in ESRC and UKRI are using certain terms here which might not be the same way that other people use terms, because we have this sort of we have sort of three broad types of data that we're often talking about in ESRC. And that's kind of rough, but we have sort of smart data, administrative data, and survey data, and that's not a perfect distinction between those sources, and often there's a lot of overlapping between some collections which are survey data plus a bit of smart data, or administrative data can be a term that you can use to refer to smart data. But the way we kind of roughly think about it is that administrative data is the data generated by public services, so things like tax records and health records and that sort of thing, benefits recipients. So that's kind of what goes into the administrative data camp, and we've got SDR UK program that largely kind of covers that area of. Then we've got loads of surveys and censuses and such, which are sort of deliberately designed, going out, talking to doing a sample and talking to people and getting answers to questions. And then we also have the third thing, which is sort of smart data, which is the data that's being generated passively as a result of the increasing digitalization of everything. And a lot of that data tends to be coming from the private sector, from customer transactions, loyalty cards, apps, and financial data, even things like energy systems and satellite data. And that's kind of what we think about when we're talking about smart data. Other uses of the term smart data are available, and that's all I just wanted to say to try and clear that up slightly. So turning to some questions now, the first area that we were going to talk about actually in our list of things was really about new insights that come from these data sources. But I feel like we've covered that quite well already from hearing from our panelists. We've heard about how smart data is bringing more granularity, more geographic detail. So unless there's any more that panelists want to add to that, I'm going to suggest that we kind of move to the second area that we had pre-prepared, which is more about the quality and reliability of smart data sources, because obviously data that comes from a byproduct of some other purpose is not designed to be used for research as its primary reason for being generated. So that can cause additional challenges. So how do we build confidence that these types of data, these data generated from digital systems, are actually reflecting reality? What are some of the additional challenges that we face when working with new and emerging smart data sets? And what can we be doing to validate them or triangulate them with other types of data? Would anyone like to have a go at that first? I wonder if it's something that Rachel might have a view on.
Sure, happy to. I think that there's a couple of comments that I'd make. So one is, some of this data is much more a picture of reality than any survey data we have. I mean, if you have the scanner data from a supermarket, that is a perfect picture of everything that was sold in that supermarket, but subject to, the machine breaking down. So in that sense, we have a really good measure of what that is, and in a way better than what we might have from a survey data. That doesn't mean that it always is, though. And I think the way that academic economists have tended to think about it is that if we can understand the measurement error, all data has some kind of measurement error in it, having two sources that have different types of measurement error actually give you a better picture of the underlying thing that you're trying to get at. And so it's really about understanding what the measurement errors are, who's not sampled. So market research firms aren't that interested in poor people because they don't spend very much. So we may be underrepresenting poor people. Once we understand that, we can try and account for that in some way. So I think it's a lot about the validation of it, and the thinking about is really understanding the collection processes and the measurement processes so that we can understand where the different types of errors arise. And we see big differences in the Kantar data to the LCFS, but I don't think we can say that the LCFS is reality. The living cost and food survey, sorry, the typical, the sample, the survey data that we use to measure expenditure, they measure slightly different things, and we can compare them and learn more about reality by looking at both of them together.
Thanks, Rachel. And Michael, you touched on this briefly in your section as well, about the importance that ONS has placed on the quality of the time series, especially when it comes to something like price statistics. How is that panning out for you with these kind of newer sources that you're bringing in?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The challenge is slightly different for consumer price statistics. So we now have scanner data, so our prices across the month. We have a census of all prices in a store, and we have the underlying quantities. The challenge for us is more on the method side. So when constructing a price index based on sample data, you have a fixed sample, you can control quite easily for quantity and quality changes within that sample. But when you're using electronic point of sale data, essentially the basket changes every month. So you've got a different mix of products, and you've got quality changes and quantity changes within the changing baskets. So the challenge for us has been using kind of new methods in order to produce a set of price indices that control for quantity and quality over time. So the methods that we use now are very different. So operate over a 25-month window rather than comparing prices between a reference and base period in order to control for the different nature of the data. So having the data is great and it's lots more information, but it needs to be combined in a way that produces a meaningful price index, and that's been the challenge of the work.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, in what ways are you able to draw on external academic input to that process of developing new methodologies and verifying, validating methodologies?
Yes, so some statistical offices have been early adopters of using scanner data. So Netherlands, for example, has been using scanner data for well over a decade. And Australia, New Zealand, and other stats offices have also been using the data. So there's a wide range of literature available on kind of the methods that should be used to exploit these new data sources. And the international guidance is starting to settle down a little bit now, given there are tens of stats offices using these new data sources. So the international community has been extremely helpful in shaping the set of methods that we've used. And we also have the Economic Statistics Centre Excellence as well at ONS. And there's a number of kind of world-leading academics like Kevin Fox and others who we've commissioned research from to enable us to make a final decision on the type of index method to use to exploit these new data sources.
That's really reassuring. I mean, Dougie, you at Smart Data Foundry, you've got millions of customer bank account details, or not details, but de-identified data. But not everyone's a NatWest customer. How do you try to understand the limits or the kind of completeness of your view of the world?
So we've done a few things. I mean, so I mentioned in my talk, we visualize some of the outputs via circles on a map. And actually, from a practical point of view, when you click onto one of the circles, you get the number of people in the area, but you also get the number of NatWest customers in our sample. So you get a percentage representation almost immediately. But we've also done a paper where we've looked at our NatWest sample, we've looked at it from a geographic perspective, how representative it is, how that representativeness changes over different regions, and it does change. So, for example, NatWest includes Legacy Royal Bank of Scotland, so there's a bit more of a stronghold within Scotland. So our sample is over up to over 11% of Scottish population. But in some cases, it's quite a bit lower than that in different parts of the country. So we do know there's regional variations, and we also know that there's age band variations as well. So there's been a bit of talk this morning about younger cohort, and NatWest might not be the most attractive brands to younger people who want to go with Monzo and Starling and Revolut and these kind of startup challenger banks. So there are limitations to what we have, and I think picking up on what Rachel said, I think provided we're aware of the limitations, then that's the kind of important piece for us. And so we have, and as part of that paper that I mentioned, we have done a bit of triangulation with other data sources. So because we do need to make sure that I think we do have a duty, I think, when the data is being used for research purposes, to make people aware of, as I say, what the limitations are, because it's not perfect.
And how about the Bank of England, Philip? Is there? I mean, you talked about the survey that you've been using. Is there appetite at the bank to be looking at some of the sort of transactional data sets where you might not be a traditional method that's behind the generation of insight, but it might be providing a kind of different perspective on something that is of interest to managing the kind of UK economy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely kind of interesting sort of insights from new data sets of all sort of different types at the bank. I mean, 18 months or so ago, Ben Bernanke carried out a review of the bank's sort of economic forecasting and framework, but as part of that, there are a kind of series of recommendations about basically how the bank can make better use of data and sort of insights from new data sets, and so that can cover potentially quite a broad range of things. But I think some of the insights from sort of scanner level data, and I know that there are people at the bank who are already sort of exploring this type of issue, but I think the bank itself also holds quite a lot of transaction level data from the PRA, which are sort of huge data sets, which are sort of held more for sort of regulatory purposes, but actually have potentially quite a lot of value for sort of understanding what's sort of going to happen, what's happening in sort of the economy, and sort of more for a monetary policy angle. So there are sort of people within the bank having conversations about trying to sort of make those types of data more accessible to, I guess, initially to sort of other people within the bank, but hopefully, I guess, in the longer term, more widely available for research and things too.
If let's move to the next question, because one of the things we often hear from researchers is that they really struggle to even get access in the first place to new forms of data, because it's not as easy as going to the UK Data Archive and downloading something. It can be about having the right relationships in place and knowing who to talk to. What's it been like? What's your experience been like trying to acquire these data sets in the first place in practice? I wonder if we could start with Rachel again on that question.
Sure, it's very varied. It depends on the provider. I mean, I think we have some instances where we feel like it's been a very easy relationship. Many of the data providers that we've worked with, both with the financial data and with the Kantar, are very interested in, say, learning about academic methods for analyzing data. And so they're interested in a two-way relationship where we get the data, but they can also talk to us about the research and what's interesting and understand, so that they can learn from that. So it is all about the individual relationships, I think, though, and that can bring risks. So I think in terms of advice, like being clear about the contractual relationships and who has the right to publish and who has the ownership of the work that's done, that can be very tricky. That's much clearer when you're working with public sector bodies that have that very clearly articulated. The data can be very expensive. It can be free, but it can also be expensive. So all of those things vary. I think, the initiative like the Smart Data Initiative of sharing information about how to bridge those relationships, I think is incredibly important to make the data available to a wider set of people, and perhaps to coordinate on the purchasing of the data so everyone doesn't pay the cost to the private sector firms. But I think there's a big appetite from private sector firms to work with academics. So I think that the door is open there to do that.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, hopefully things like Smart Data Research is also helping to connect up those sort of private sector data owners with researchers, because those aren't always natural relationships that form. I'm conscious that we're also already 4 minutes from the end of the meeting, so I'm just going to ask it. There is one question in the chat here, Dougie. It's a question for you, which is about who decides the data you publish at the Smart Data Foundry. Is it something that the team at Smart Data Foundry can decide for themselves, or is it something that NatWest or Sage will tell you, here are the data sets that you're allowed to publish? How does that work?
So it's a bit of a joint process. That's what I'd say. I mean, we have permissions under the underlying data sharing contracts we have with Sage or NatWest or others. but then we're ultimately trying to use those permissions to create data products that are of interest to people, so to users. So I think what I'd encourage people to do is have a look at what we publish and feedback and tell us what people might like to see. And whenever we're having conversations with new potential users, that's one of the things we always touch on is what might users be interested in, or whether they be academic researchers or policymakers, what might they be interested in us preparing. And if that takes us out with our data permissions, then we have a one-on-one conversation with the data partner to try and facilitate that the updated permissions.
Thank you. That answers that question, hopefully. And now we've only got a few minutes left, so perhaps what we might do is just ask for quick answers to a question that thinks about the future, because we've heard a lot and we've talked a lot about the new forms of data and what they can already tell us. But if we were looking ahead, what are the biggest opportunities or the biggest economic challenges ahead where better, smart data could really help us? And if we could really focus our efforts on one thing, what would that thing be? I'm going to pick on Michael to try and give us an idea for that first.
I think from an inflation perspective, now that we've delivered a suite of new systems that are capable of processing billions of data points, there's various areas of the consumer prices basket that I think will benefit from kind of large administrative data, quite volatile aspects of the basket like airfares and hotels, where we have kind of samples in place at the moment, but they do a job, but both areas of the basket are quite complex to measure. So having the more granular data, I think, will be hugely beneficial. So I think now that we have the infrastructure in place over the next few years, I think there's a real opportunity to increase the proportion of the basket that uses these large data sets.
Great, thank you, Michael. Phil, what would be your top sort of future wish?
I mean, I guess thinking about it from the sort of the firm data side, I think kind of ability to link lots of these different data sets together would be really important. I mean, there's lots of good data sets which have can offer real insights, but I think the kind of ability to kind of combine them together can sort of help make another step forward. But often these data sets are sort of confidential, are held in sort of different secure repositories, and it's not necessarily straightforward to be able to do that linking. But I think that would offer a lot more opportunities for sort of future research, but there's some sort of logistical challenges in sort of making it happen as well.
Yeah, it's on our radar, so we should come back to that in a future event, I think. Rachel, what's your top? If I give you a magic wand, what are you going to ask for?
I think understanding the impacts of AI and other technological changes on the job market and the skill demands that firms have of workers is a real challenge. And there is a lot of data out there in the virtual world, which has been marshaled a little bit to answer those questions, but I think could be utilized much better for us to understand that in real time and at a very granular level.
Brilliant. And Dougie? In a couple of words?
I'm going to piggyback onto Philip. I'm going to go with one-on-one household linkage, and that's taking us into the realms of health and wealth records, linking at that level. I think then we're into real sort of step change policy-wise.
We are, and we also get into slightly more complicated technical territory, and also we get into a world where we need to think carefully about the public engagement and the trust framework that goes around that, I think. So and those are certainly topics that we would love to pick up at future smart data webinars, but I'm afraid that is all the time we have just for this one today. First of all, we've only just scratched the surface, as these things always feel a bit like that, don't they, when they're going well. So thank you so much to our panelists. We've heard today about how smart data is bringing some new depth to some really important questions about the economy. We're going to have future sessions where we're going to be talking about other things, and we've got some good ideas in that last round of questions about what we might look at. But do let us know, audience, if there are topics that you think we should be turning our attention to. We want to be shining a light on the way that smart data can be used for the beneficial impact in society, and inspire people to be making better use of smart data. So we're going to have sessions on things like health and devolution and sustainability. The recording will be on the website, so do share that with colleagues who couldn't join today. If you would like to be kept informed about our work, the best thing to do is to sign up for our monthly newsletter, and we'll put a link round for the newsletter sign up to do that. And finally, again, just a big thank you to our speakers, Michael, Rachel, Dougie, Philip and Catherine and the organising team for all of the work to put these events together. Thank you all of us for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your week. We look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thanks very much, everyone.